Hello, all, and welcome to another webinar in the Phenomenal Science Teaching series. I'm your presenter. I'm Vic Sampson. I'm an associate professor of STEM education at the University of Texas at Austin. I'm also the Chief Innovation Officer at Argument Driven Inquiry. Don't forget, for any of these webinar sessions, we will be doing we are offering continuing education unit credits. You get 0.5 for each session and 6 credits for the full series. So make sure that you join in and attend, and then you can get these credits to go along with getting license renewals. We can follow the same basic structure for our webinars. We'll do about 20 minutes about presentation on the topics, then we'll have time for questions, and then we'll end up with wrap-ups. So today what we want to do is talk about promoting and supporting productive student talk. And this is actually the part 2 on a 2-parter about how to make these kinds of interactions happen inside the classroom. So as a quick reminder of what we talked about last week or throughout this entire series, we've been talking a lot about how to promote three-dimensional instruction. And this idea of three-dimensional instruction is kids using disciplinary content, science and engineering practice, and recurring themes and concepts or cross-cutting concepts, depending on where you're located, to figure out something about the world around them. Now, one of the key parts of three-dimensional instruction is kids using the practices as a way to develop explanations or make sense of these phenomena, learn something new. And one of the fundamental parts of all the science practices is talks. And I really like this quote about this idea that teachers, if they're going to induct students into these practices, so like really help kids understand how to engage in them, not just be able to describe them or pick them out of a list on a test, but being able to engage in these different practices. They have to have opportunities to make their thinking visible and available to others while they're engaging in those practices. So last time we talked a little bit about different formats that you can engage in to help kids participate in productive talk. We talked a lot about the whole group format last time, which has several pros, also has a couple cons, but the idea that you can get more ideas generated and it's easier for a teacher to steer the conversation is definitely a pro. A con tends to be it's harder to get everybody involved. It's easier for individual students to hide. There's less individual talk because it's more people. So today what we want to do is really focus more on this idea of small groups, right? So where you can have still quite a few ideas being shared and lots more individual talk, but how to address the issue of teacher cannot really steer the conversation. And this also works well for when you're doing partner talk, when you have only 2 students talking to each other in kind of pairs, and kind of the pros and cons of that. So in thinking about small groups or partners, I really think there's 6 big recommendations for promoting and supporting talk, right? In terms of productive academically, helping kids engage in practice, helping make sense of phenomenon. So I want to run through these real quick. One, probably the most important thing, just like when you're thinking about whole group discussions, is know where you need to go before you begin, right? So it's really easy to say, I'm going to get the kids talking and let's see where the conversation goes, or I'm going to hope for the best, but really know what you need to get out of this talk, right? Are the students needing to make a product? Are they needing to produce something together? Are you trying to get an idea to surface? If it is an idea, which one do you need to hear about and make sure you're discussing? Is there lots of ideas floating around and we all need to agree on an explanation or the best way to analyze data or something like that, right? So know where you need to go before you begin is the number 1 recommendation. The second one, as before, is really thinking about the type of talk that will help you get there, right? So a little bit last time we talked about these 4 different types of talk. This also counts for small groups as well. And you can think about these 4 types. There's the investigative talk where kids are talking about how to find more information, looking for trends, how to make sense of something, or how to look for trends or relationships or differences in data. Then there's the sense making where, okay, I've got all these ideas. How do I connect those? How do I develop a common shared understanding from all of these things that have been happening that we've done together, things we've seen, things we've collected, all of those pieces. There's also the critiquing talk, is sharing, supporting, challenging, refining explanations or solutions. So I've generated this idea. Is it valid or acceptable? How do we know? How do we determine one idea or another? And then problematizing talk, where you're really looking at what are we missing? What are our gaps? How do we make improvements, right? So one of these four types of talk will happen most often when you're engaged in these practices, and certain practices lend themselves to more, right? So if you're planning and carrying on investigation, kids are probably going to be getting involved in investigative talk, right? So it really becomes this idea of how do we get them to think about gathering more information, looking for trends, looking for differences, those kinds of things. The next thing is you're really going to need to think about what's going to create the need to talk. Right. So if you think about the best discussions, especially in small groups, those always happen when there's multiple positions, perspectives, or solution paths. Right. And what that basically means, they're not necessarily just trying to find one answer, but we're looking at different views, what could be there. And that happens on any of those four different kinds of talks. So the more that you can open a space where people can give multiple positions, perspectives, you're going to get more student-to-student talk happening, and more likely to meet your overall goal of where you're trying to get to. Now, this is where we get really into the small group piece. So as you're having groups of students talk, if you have a class of 30 students, you may have 7 or 8 groups of students working, maybe more. And as they're talking, you need to be able to move around and check in with students to make sure that that you can help them think about things in different ways, steer them in different directions. One of the biggest things that happens, though, is we'll get stuck at one group and start talking to them for a long time, or giving an individual student a lot of help, and then the other groups end up just kind of doing whatever. So I like to use this routine to check in. I call it 2 questions, a nudge, and a goal. And basically how it works like this is you go up to a small group, you ask your first question, which is, would one of you fill me in on what you've been doing or thinking about, right? Just let open up. Then the second question you just ask, would anyone else like to add anything? And the reason you add the second question is usually the one that's been dominating the conversation is going to basically tell you what they've been thinking. So by asking the second question, you can get another point of view and somebody else's ideas that's going on. Then 3, you give them a nudge. So based on that, have you tried thinking about this? Have you tried doing this? Push them in some direction, right? Something that'll make their conversation or the outcome more productive. And then give them a goal. Say, I'm going to go visit the other groups. I'm going to be back in about 10 minutes. See if you can get whatever that goal is done before I get back, right? So the nice thing about this routine is you can do it in about 2 minutes or so, and it's very easy for you to remember the process. You just come in and like, what have you all been talking about? Great. Anything else you want to add? Have you tried this? And do this by the time I get back. And you can really easily check in with groups and keep everything kind of going and productive and making progress on that. So have that routine for checking in with students. The other thing, if you're having individual or you're having small groups work, you always need to have a routine for having them share out. And one of the ones I like the best is, I call it just a number reporter. So when you're working in having small groups, I like keeping those groups pretty consistent throughout time and color coding them. So you might be up an orange group, yellow group, blue group, right? And then number the students at those. So have every group the same size, groups of 4, groups of 3, and then assign numbers to each student who are sitting in a certain spot. So 1, 2s, 3s, and 4s. And what we're going to do for number reporter, basically all you do is you wait, you let kids start talking, and then after a few minutes of them talking, say, okay, get everyone's attention real quick and say, okay, we're going to share out in a few minutes. Pick a number. 2s, you'll be responsible for sharing your team's ideas. Make sure you're ready to go. Give them another 3 minutes or so to kind of finish up talking. That way they know who's going to be presenting. And then you can say, okay, time to share out. Orange team, orange 2. What would you like to share? Green 2. What would you like to share? Yellow 2. And it's a really nice way to make sure that everyone's prepared to kind of share out, and you can make sure that all groups have participated and are ready to go. So it's just a simple strategy It doesn't need to be the same one as this, but you need to have a routine that kids get used to for when they're sharing out in a way that gets everybody participating. The nice thing about using numbers is you can pick one for each share, right? 3's on this one, 4's on this one, 1's on this one, and you can move it around pretty easily. So if you have, say, 4 share outs in groups of 4, you're able to get every kid to share, contribute something to the conversation in a class period. Another routine for sharing out, one of the things that will happen to you as you have groups discussing, sometimes you'll have many groups coming up with the same idea or coming to the same answer or the same conclusion. So when you're sharing out, you can also add the routine of report something new. And this is just adding a little bit of different in your questions, right? So when you're saying, okay, it's time to share out, don't forget 2s are doing the talking, team A, would you like to share, right? So team A reports. Now, instead of just saying, hey, team B, what did you all talk about? You phrase the question around adding something different. So team B, do you all have something different to add, right? Team C, do you have something that hasn't been said yet? It's team 4, something that hasn't been said. And the idea is adding new ideas as you go along, so it's not kids saying, well, we got that too. We got that same thing. Or just repeating over and over again the same thing. And it's the idea of getting more diverse ideas out. Works particularly well when you're doing kind of investigative talk or problematizing or sense-making kind of thing. Finally, you also need, the 6th recommendation is you really need to have a routine for when groups are struggling with the task, right? So we will see some groups pick up the talk and are working really well together and clicking on the task. Other groups will be struggling, reach a disagreement, not sure what to do next, haven't had an idea pop up that they want to follow. So when you notice that, instead of kind of swooping in as a teacher and then telling them exactly what to do, use a routine like the number traveler. And what you do with that is you just say, okay, we're going to take a few minutes to share ideas between groups. 3s, you're going to be responsible for going to another team to learn about what the other teams have been doing. And your job is to give them some good ideas. And then, but more importantly, collect good ideas that you can bring back to your team. Take a few minutes to talk in your group. What information does your group need, right? Like, what are you stuck on? Give the groups 2 minutes to talk and say, okay, 3, stand up. I want you to move one group to the right. 3 minutes to share out what you've been doing, hear what they've been doing, share ideas. Okay, after those times, okay, 3s, please return to your group and share what you've learned. And when you do this kind of strategy, you're able to mix kind of ideas around. And you can also be very specific about which groups go into which way. So go to the left or the right, orange and green switch, whatever it ends up going to do if you want to make sure groups are talking to each other. But it's a great way to kind of spread ideas and get people unstuck very quickly when they're working in their small groups. It also makes the talk much more productive. And then finally, last but not least is the same as for whole group. Anytime you want to have productive talk and support that process in your classroom, you really need to think about the norms and the classroom interactions, right? And instead of focusing on just classroom rules about being on time, late policy, that kind of stuff, thinking about what are these norms that we want to have in our classroom. I like these 4. These don't have to be the same ones you use, but I like this idea of respectful, making sure the place is safe, right? So you can share ideas and you're not going to be ridiculed for it. We're inclusive. We want to bring people into discussion, right? So if they haven't said anything, what do we do to bring them in? Supportive, how do we help each other out? How do we learn together? How do we build off ideas? And productive is like, we're going to go off track every once in a while. What do we do to bring it back in, right? Are we okay with tangents? Are we not so okay? And really talking about this as a group of what does this look like? And then B, what should we do to make sure that this is happening? And then reflecting on that after this. Like, do we feel like we were pretty respectful? Do we feel like we're inclusive? Do we have to do more to do those kinds of things? And the more that you focus on these kinds of things, the better these discussions are going to get, because people feel more comfortable and feel safe being able to take the chance of sharing an idea that might be wrong without being penalized for it. So you can kind of think of these routines or these recommendations, kind of things you have to think about before a talk starts or a discussion starts, a small group discussion starts, and things that you can do during, right? So if you're thinking about before, being really clear where you need to go on this discussion, what kids need to produce, what ideas need to surface, what do you need to reach consensus on. Know that very clearly. Then figure out what type of talk that you need to support to make that happen. That's related to the practices. And then make sure you create a need. Oops, that was misspelled, but create a need for there to be talk, right? So it's not just what's the right answer, but looking at multiple possibilities, multiple ideas. So you set those up before. Then when the talk starts, make sure you have your routine for checking in and doing it, routine for sharing out and doing it, and a routine for when groups get stuck. And then kind of revisit those norms during the discussion. You can also do those after as well of how things were going. So you can kind of think of those are the big 7 that you've got to think through before and during any kind of talk that's going on inside your classroom. So you might be wondering what this looks like in practice. So last time we talked a little bit about this investigation called Swimming in the Dead Sea. And what we talked about is how you can use a phenomenon to get kids thinking about what could be happening, answering a big guiding question of an investigation, developing a model to kind of elicit their thinking, and then having these questions that they have based on their gaps in their understanding. So we're talking about kind of problematizing talk last time. Now, what you can do then is you can switch that to more small groups at this next point to start figuring things out. So one of the things that I think is really important in three-dimensional instruction is putting ideas on the table, right? And really putting ideas that will help kids answer the questions that they have. So one way you can do that is by introducing these ideas through a reading of some kind. So you might have a goal of trying to find helpful information. Because they're finding information, they're trying to do kind of more investigative talk. So what are they digging into? What are they looking for? And their need for that is that unanswered question. So those are kind of the 3 before things that you need to kind of decide on and be clear about. So then when you have that, you can start thinking about, okay, I'm going to give this reading out, and kids are going to read this. I'm going to have them talk over that. So I need a routine for them checking in. So I'll go around, do the 2 questions, a nudge and a goal as they're discussing this reading. I'll have a share out opportunity with a number reporter, but I'm going to add something new because I don't want them to say the same thing every time as they report out. And then in this case, for like struggling groups who might not have picked up something in the reading, I'm going to do a class record. So when people share out, I'm going to add onto the board or onto a chart, a class record of important ideas to keep track of. So you can do this around each of these readings, right? So you can have each time having groups read and discuss these and then identify things that they know. And what that ends up looking like is something like this. You can have kids read on their own in a group, then you talk in the small groups about what they thought was most important, what's useful, right? Then you have each group share out, and then you make a class record, and then you move on to the next reading. So having that stages gets the talk moving really, really well. You can also think about when kids are trying to come up with a product, like an adequate plan for an investigation. So you've got these ideas seeded. Now, how do we answer the questions we haven't been able to answer yet? So they have to now get an adequate plan for carrying out an investigation. This is really more about investigating and problematizing kinds of talk. They still have ideas that they still have unanswered questions, and they have ideas to test on that. And when they're building their investigation together, you can use that same routine for checking in. Sharing out can be a number reporter again. And in this case, if kids are struggling, maybe I'll use a numbered reporter or a numbered traveler to spread ideas if they get stuck. In this case, they might have these materials. They have to figure out where they're going from. And then their goal as a team is to fill out this investigation proposal as they're going. So to kind of support the talk as they're doing it, so it doesn't just become a single kid's assignment with everybody else looking at that, is we want, as a team, come up with a basic plan, right? Then I'm going to have kids share with other groups, and so they can report out and talk about that. And then they're going to come back and revise and finish. So that's kind of the sequence of events that would happen in the class. But as a teacher, I can use these kind of activities to help with that, right? So when they're coming up with their basic plans, I can go around to each group and do check-ins, right? And do the 2 questions and a nudge and a goal, right? Then when we get to sharing with groups, I'll introduce the numbered reporter and the numbered traveler to support that interaction. And then finally, when they go back to their groups, revise and finish, I'll do check-ins with each group, 2 questions, a nudge and a goal again, right? So these ideas that you can bring in together can really help support kids as they're talking and make these interactions much more productive in terms of sense making or figuring out or being academically fruitful. Just some quick reminders. Our last webinar in this series will be next Thursday. It's called Supporting Emerging Multilingual Learners in Science. That'll be 4 to 4:30. You can register at argument-driveninquiry.com /webcast. That way, if you can't attend, we'll be able to still send you the video from it so you can watch it on your own time. If you're interested in other professional learning opportunities, we're offering webinars all the time. There's several we'll do next quarter as well. You can check out our calendar at www.argument-driveninquiry.com /programs events. We also do face-to-face professional learning. I do different workshops or come out to districts. If you're interested in learning more about that, that's argument-driveninquiry.com again /professional learning if you want to learn more about those opportunities. As always, if you have any questions after this, feel free to contact me. My email is at victor@argument-driveninquiry.com. You can also follow us on any of these socials, Twitter, now X, Instagram, Facebook. They're all groups of folks that have been trying this kind of teaching and can offer feedback and advice. Get connected. It helps to kind of figure these things out as we go. So with that, I want to thank you once again for joining us for this webinar. Have a great weekend and hope to see you next week. Thanks all.